Good evening, everybody. Your Excellency, Engineer Salim Al-Aufi, President Blake, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure as the chair of the Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center, SQCC as we are known, to welcome you to this banquet, marking the start of tomorrow's conference with our 2019 partner, the University of Houston, Clear Lake. A main tenet of SQC's mission is to share knowledge and experience with our friends in the United States. This tenet is at the heart of our annual collaborations with great American institutions. We are honored to collaborate with UHCL this year, which marks our 10th annual conference in the United States. I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to President Blake, Provost Bergridge, Dean Short, Dr. Curtis, who was our first contact with the university, and there are many colleagues who helped make tomorrow's conference possible. We look forward to a fruitful exchange of ideas and experiences. Thank you, Dr. Blake. I also want to extend our thanks to Occidental Petroleum, the Chief Executive Officer, Vicky Hollab, Executive Vice President Sandy Lowe, who is a member of our board, and their colleagues for participating in tomorrow's event. Likewise, our thanks go to Houston TransStar, Exploration Green Conservancy, and NASA Johnson Space Center, all of which have shared their knowledge and experience with our group today during this site. I would like to give a special thanks to Dr. Lula, who has advised and assisted us along the way. Without him, the very informative visit to NASA today would not have been possible. Thank you very much for hosting us. Finally, our gratitude goes to the conference panelists, my dear countrymen and colleagues, who have traveled from far and near to contribute to tomorrow's event. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We hope that both sides will benefit from your remarks tomorrow. To begin our discussion, I'm pleased to introduce this evening's keynote speaker, His Excellency Engineer Salim bin Nasir Al-Aufi, Undersecretary of the Ministry of Oil and Gas in the Sultanate of Oman. His Excellency joined Petroleum Development Oman, PDO, in 1992. During 20 years there, he held different technical and leadership roles, including postings in Shell Nigeria as petroleum engineer and asset planner, and Shell Canada as vice president of production. His Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said appointed His Excellency to the position of CEO of the Public Authority of Civil Aviation in May 2012. In December 2013, His Excellency was appointed Undersecretary of the Ministry of Oil and Gas, where he manages exploration, production activities in Oman. His Excellency holds a master's degree in petroleum engineering from Heriot-Watt University in Scotland. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome His Excellency to the podium.
What Her Excellency forgot to mention is that in December of last year, we were also honored to be responsible for the electricity sector, in addition to the oil and gas, which makes us pretty much complete in terms of the energy part, except we still retain the title Ministry of Oil and Gas. So I was going to introduce myself, but Her Excellency did a fantastic job, so I don't have to repeat that part. I don't have a presentation to share, so I will be talking, which is great because that gives me an opportunity to actually interact a little bit more and give you an opportunity to probably interact with me as opposed to reading behind me what's happening. But before I do that, let me just get a little bit of an icebreaker so that I get to understand a little bit my audience. And I'll probably be asking one or two questions. Also, later on, I may be asking a little bit more questions. So the first one, again, in the total context of the energy and the transition, what I would like to see is probably a show of hands of how many people are either wearing, or owning a smartwatch in this room? A smartwatch, not a phone, a watch, which is actually quite representative of the total population, because if you look at how many smartwatches have been sold in 2018 alone, it's about 45 to 50 million pieces. That's not a lot if you consider the total population that we have. That's one part of the news. The other part, that it is growing extremely fast. The year before it was about 38 million. So, and before that, it was probably around the 28, 29 million pieces. So it is growing, but it's not growing as fast as the smartphones. So the second question is, who in this room doesn't have a smartphone? That's almost zero. Yeah. So who in this room has 2 smartphones active? That's an interesting one. So we go from very few having smartwatches to few that actually have double phones. Does anyone have 3 phones in this room? That's not unusual. There are people who do. So if you compare then how many pieces of smartwatches we've sold, or the world has sold, and smartphones, there were about 1.6 billion units sold last year alone. Now, if you consider that probably 30% of them are those that like to just buy the new one as it comes, there is at least 60 to 70% that are newcomers, or 50 as a minimum, that are newcomers, which gives you an indication of how fast this thing is growing. But I will come back again to this a little bit later. What I thought I would do tonight is really break this sort of introduction into 2 pieces. One is to just get us all at the same sort of level of understanding with regards to why do we need to even bother about the energy transition, or maybe I would say the energy revolution, because we need almost a revolution if we understand the serious challenges that we're going to be facing. And this is not related to Oman per se, it is pretty much a global challenge. So I will start with that part and briefly go through some of the key challenges that we are facing. Some of them are extremely opposing challenges. And then I will talk a little bit about what's happening in Oman today, the sort of things that we are executing and are enjoying the fruits of it now, things that are currently being executed but not yet completed, what are the plans, and where do I see the future going, at least from my perspective, or that of the oil and gas and electricity. So if we look at the energy challenge, and the reason why we need to pay a little bit more attention to it, there are many challenges. What I will probably talk about 4 or 5 of them. Let me start with the most obvious one, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room will probably have heard this number, that we are about 7.6 billion human beings in this planet as we speak. That's a lot of number. We want 7.6 billion people for a long time. If you consider that it took humanity about 2,000 years to get to the first billion, and then jumping from the first billion to where we are today, about 7.6, it only took us about 200 years. Actually, it took us about 100 years to go from the first billion to the second billion. And it took us the other 100 years to go from the second billion to 7.6. As a matter of fact, it took almost 12 years to go from 6.7 billion to 7.7 billion. So the last 12 years, we managed to add 1 billion human beings in this planet. That's almost what humanity did in the first 2,000 years of our existence. And if you look at the different United Nations forecasts, and it goes all over the place, there are indications that we will probably continue to grow at almost the same pace. And if that's the case, then if you have a grandson or a son that is just born, it's most likely that that person, boy or girl, will see the Earth population doubling in his lifetime. That's quite a lot of people in one planet. I mean, you can imagine what sort of energy demand that population will be requiring. So on one hand, there is a population explosion, and we are doubling the number, and we're adding a lot of people, and at a much faster rate than we used before. Even if we maintain the same percentage, just the sheer number itself is actually quite significant. That's one part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge, which is also related to the human population, is the life expectancy have extended. About 200 years ago, probably the average of the average of the highest is about 45 years. 40 years, the best average is about 45 years. That's the highest expected life expectancy. Today, the lowest average is about 55. There are places where they probably go down to 50. So we've gone from the maximum expected of about 40, 45, to the lowest of about 50, 55. In fact, a few weeks back, I was reading in the newspaper that they were welcoming a passenger from India to Abu Dhabi who is 135 years old. Yeah, and that person is not on a wheelchair, he's actually walking, 135 years old, traveling, which gives you an indication of the fact that we are staying longer and producing more, which means the population of the planet is actually increasing, and therefore our demand for energy, just from these two challenges, is also increasing. And it needs to be met. I mean, so there's no question about that. The third dimension is related to the technology labs. So if we look at where we are today with technology, and this is why I asked at the very beginning how many people are wearing smartwatches or owning a smartphone. You can see that is completely changing the way we manage technology, the way technology is becoming part and parcel of our lives. So let me ask you another question. In this room, or do you know of anybody in this case that actually have a smart ring? And these are the new gadgets that are coming to the market, and probably you will see it in the market next year. Apple is already designing and they are launching a smart ring. There are few, but of course you need a big force like Apple to launch it in the market so that it becomes the next trend for people to start buying it, and that is coming. When that one is there, it is absolutely amazing what sort of data it will be recording continuously. And I can imagine you don't even need to take it off your finger to charge it, because nowadays you can actually charge remotely. You don't have to be connected to anything. So with that, and all the smartphones that we are currently holding, can you imagine the volume of data that we are collecting? This is only our own personal gadgets. Of course, the technology is developing so fast that we now have what they call the Internet of Things that are installed in practically everything and everywhere. You can get them in controlling the climate, to the lights, to the doors, to the securities. And we in the oil and gas sector are no different than any other industry. We're actually getting more and more of these Internet of Things devices in practically every equipment that we have. Everyone recording data at a rate that we have never imagined before, and we are collecting them like nobody's business. And of course, all of that data, our data, the data that we are collecting from the different equipment and devices that we're installing, is all going to require huge storage space and a lot of analysis systems. Nowadays, before I go to work, I look at my phone and Google tells me which way is the best way to go. Not that I have a lot of options, there are about 3 ways to go from where I live to the office, but at least it will tell me which road is, for whatever reason, congested. and avoid it. And it doesn't do that because the government have installed smart devices in all their roads and they're actually alerting us. It does it because every smartphone that we are carrying with us is recording our location continuously, feeding that information over to Google. Google is analyzing all that data and returning back to us and saying, this is the speed at which that particular phone is moving, and that information is automatically transferred back to us in terms of information that we can use. Imagine the volume and the sheer volume of data that is collected and the magnitude of the processing requirement and the energy that all of that sort of data and analysis is taking. The oil and gas business, and I can only speak about this part of the business, is also changing extremely fast. There was a time, at least in my time, when I was explaining to somebody this morning that we have about 60 to 70 people on the rig floor, managing the drilling operation. Today, you can actually drill the well with about 1 or 2 people on the rig floor. The rest is all mechanized and automated. And my vision of that particular future is that we will have rigs remotely operated, 1 or 2 people probably in the office managing 2 or 3 rigs, drilling simultaneously at the same time, all controlled remotely. And we don't need to have any person on the rig. That's how much data we're collecting. And this is not a science fiction or a dream. This is actually happening as we speak. Last year when I was in Houston, I visited Halliburton, and I understand Schlumberger is pretty much in the same direction, is already implementing this. The next for us would probably be, and a lot of people here from the oil and gas, is probably going to be collecting all that information, getting the machine to analyze it as we go home to sleep, making a lot of decisions with regards to what is the next possible potential well in the sequence, making a lot of changes to the drilling sequence, sending those commands over to the rig to be able to actually instruct whoever is preparing the locations and managing the rig moves that the next location has already been picked. The human being doesn't have to interface with any of that. And again, this is not a science fiction. It is happening, and I know it's happening in some places as we speak today. It's just a matter of time before we actually see it introduced in a commercial way. And that is exploding the volume of data and also the need for even more energy to handle all of that. Now the fourth dimension is something we don't talk a lot about, which is out of the 7.5 billion people that are living today in this planet, there are at least 2, if not more, billion people that don't have access to a reliable source of energy. Those are the people that don't have smartwatches today or phones, smartphones, because they don't have reliable access to energy. That's not going to be the case for too long. With today's advancement in solar energy and wind energy that is making energy accessible to a lot of people, most of that 2 billion people will probably be urbanized in no time, and they will enjoy the sort of quality of life that we are all enjoying. They will come with a lot of demands themselves. And if you can imagine the population growth that I mentioned earlier, a lot of the unurbanized areas are becoming urbanized, then all of that is probably going to be putting even more demand on energy. So if there is anything from what I just said, forget about the numbers that I've quoted, you don't have to remember any of them, just remember one message. Our need and demand for energy is only growing. Yeah? I can't see a future where energy is either declining or even staying still. Just our population growth, the fourth revolution in this industry revolution, and digitization, only these 2 dimensions are going to increase our demand for energy. So that's one part of it, which is the fact that we need more energy as we progress on a daily basis. Now the opposing part of it is the environment. We all know that there are a lot of environmental concerns with the way that we're currently producing energy. not to mention, of course, all the other implications. I am not an environmentalist, but what I see around us is actually a clear indication that global warming or environmental changes are real. Whether we like it or not, whether we talk about it or not, it is happening, and we see a lot of it around us. In Oman, of course, we are now talking about cyclones, and Qaddam Faisal is here, we can talk more about that than myself, and hurricanes and floods and more waterfalls, almost on a continuous basis. These are things we didn't talk about 10 years ago. It happens from time to time. Now it's becoming more of a regular thing for us, and I'm sure it's happening all over the place. The CO2 part alone, if we look at where we are for a long period of time, the concentration of CO2, now CO2 is part and parcel of our life. It's not something we create. It was always there and it will continue to be there. The only thing we did is we released it. So the concentration of CO2 in the air used to be around 200 parts per million. Today, it's estimated that that concentration is almost at 450 parts per million. We more than doubled. And that doubling of the CO2 concentration, not to mention the other component, actually happened in the last 120 years, not too long ago. So we managed to double it, and with that, the global temperature had gone up by about 1 degree. All these changes that we've seen is just from 1 degree increase in the temperature. Now that apparently is a huge thing for the environmentalists and of course for the planet. If we continue at this pace, it's estimated that we could be anywhere between 3 to 6 degrees unless we do something. The United Nations estimate that we're probably emitting on an annual basis about 33 billion tons of CO2 every year. If we are to achieve the global targets of less than 2 degrees by 2040 or 1.5 degrees by 2050, we need to lower that concentration or that emission to less than 18 billion. It's almost half. We need to cut our emission by half. Now, since 2015 until today, when that was signed, we only did the opposite. And when I say we, it's not only the oil and gas or the fossil fuel, but of course everything else that we contribute to CO2. We did the opposite, which means the challenge is getting bigger. We have to get down to the less than 18 billion emission extremely fast. And if we don't, then the 1.5 degree or the 2 degrees is not likely to be met as a target. And therefore, we will see ourselves heading more toward the 3 to 6 degrees. And I can't imagine what the world will look like if we are heading in that direction, if 1 degree is making all these changes. So we have two opposing forces. On one hand, we need more and more energy to satisfy our growth in population, the digitization era that we're getting ourselves into, urbanization and so on, that is only increasing the energy demand. On the other hand, we need to lower our carbon footprint massively. These two things will have to coexist. There is no way we say we'll do one without the other. We can't cut down on the energy demand because that is just happening, and we can't continue emitting CO2 because that is just not acceptable. And therefore, we have to find a way of getting a solution that makes these two coexist at the same time. So that's really the case for change, and I'm pretty much a believer that we need to do something globally, not just in one country. But what I can talk about briefly is what's happening in Oman, what's happening, what we did, what we're planning to do. So on the things that we have done already and things that we can bank, on the project side, we of course have few projects that we can feel extremely proud of. First one, of course, is we are trying to lower our energy demand in terms of handling the water that we produce with the oil. Oil gets produced together with the oil. We produce about 9 to 10 million barrels of water for every million barrels of oil. That's really our production. And therefore, we're handling a lot of water on a daily basis. PDO did one project that at least takes 1 million out of that water that we produce and instead of burning more energy, to pump it back again into the ground. And of course, with that energy comes CO2 and what have you. They've decided that we will actually create a green farm using neem trees or reed beds that love to actually feed on the hydrocarbon content that is available in the water or with the water. And we've created a pond. Today it's the size of about 6 kilometers squared, and it uses about 1 million barrels of water. We think that we probably cut the carbon emission by about 500 to 600 tons. 1,000 tons, sorry, which is of course a significant contribution to lowering our carbon footprint, but that's only one part of it. We are planning to expand this because we think it is actually great for the environment. In fact, you can actually see this from space if you zoom in to the area where it is. And it's becoming an extremely favorite environmental project because we're getting a lot of birds migrating to this area that we have not seen at all in this part of the world. So it's adding a lot to the environment as well as cutting our carbon footprint. That's one part. The other one is we have a lot of steam projects. Oxy has a steam project in Oman, PDU has a steam project. And traditionally, we produce the steam by burning the natural gas. One project that again PDU and Oxy is planning to do another one, hopefully soon, an even bigger one, is to take the sun energy and convert that into steam. So we're using solar steam in order to supply that steam which we need for our enhanced oil recovery instead of using the traditional way of burning gas. And currently the project that we have already implemented is producing about 6,000 tons per day. That is lowering our carbon footprint by at least 300,000 tons per day for not burning that energy and actually using solar steam. And I'm looking forward to when we decide to expand that project even more. That's on the project side. There are more happening, but these are the main projects. On the regulation side, in 2016, the government decided that we need, because our consumption for gasoline is going up at a much significant rate than the population growth or actually the number of cars that are on the road. We were growing at about 9 to 10%, much higher than what we were expecting. That's really high. And it is primarily driven by the fact that gasoline, gas in this country as we call it, was subsidized by the government big time. And therefore, the price was flat and the consumption of gasoline was just increasing. So the government decided that we need to probably put a little bit more control on this, and the subsidy was lifted in 2016 completely. Immediately what we saw is that instead of growing at a rate of 9 to 10%, we actually lowered in 2016 by 5%. So we had a gap of about 15% delta between the projected trajectory and where we were. In 2017, we was even lower than that by another 3 to 5%. I think now we are flattening in terms of the demand. And that really drove two things. Number one, people are becoming now more and more aware of the fact that the energy they're using is no longer subsidized, and therefore every trip and every journey needs to be worth taking. The other thing I've noticed is that when they go to buy their car, the first thing they do is they check the gasoline consumption for that particular car. And a lot of cars they're buying today are actually more economical, smaller cars. And it will probably be some time before we see that one happening here because the cars in Texas are just bigger. But the cars are getting smaller, more energy efficient, and the consumption is lower. They've also introduced in 2016, which we didn't have before, the public transportation. It will take some time before we all abandon our cars and start using it, but it's picking momentum and it's growing. So that is an additional sort of component that the government has added. And I think that is contributing to the awareness that energy has value and we need to appreciate it. The other thing the regulators have introduced on the electricity side is the introduction of the CRT, or the cost reflective tariff for power for the big industrial usage. Again, electricity in Oman is subsidized, and it was subsidized for everybody. Now, at least the industrial users of electricity, the big users, are paying the fair and real price of the energy, of the electricity. And what we've seen immediately, two things happen. Number one, they started cutting down their demand because they're now starting to become more efficient as the energy price have gone up to maintain their profit margin. And the second thing we've seen is that they started to shift the work cycle a little bit so that it matches the low peak or off-peak demand. And both of them are actually lowering the total carbon footprint, because even when you shift, even though your total consumption remains the same, by not using electricity at peak demand, which is during the day, you actually start using it in the evening, the efficiency of the power turbines is much better, and they produce much higher electricity for a low carbon footprint. So both of them are helping. These are the things that we've already implemented. What we're doing in terms of solar projects, we have implemented few, mostly in terms of putting solar panels on car parks. So the Ministry of Oil and Gas, we now have solar panels on all our car park. PDO have solar panels on all their car park. Your Oxy's car park is pretty much underground, so there's not much solar power you need to install in that one. But a few other areas that are looking at what we did and say that's probably a good project. And we estimated that the cost of that solar power in at least the ministry's car park can be paid off within 5 years, just the energy saving. We've seen that one already this year. But in terms of the projects that are currently executed in Oman on the solar energy, first of all, the wind energy, as we speak, we are commissioning our first wind energy. That is 50 megawatt of wind energy going to be introduced to the grid. In fact, they're just finalizing the commissioning. I understand they're probably completing all of that within the next few weeks. And with that, 50 megawatt of wind energy will be added. That was our pilot project. It's already been completed. What we also did this year is we have awarded the first major solar project, 500 megawatts of electricity that is currently undergoing construction, and we think by end of 2021, early 22, that will probably be commissioned, and we will be adding 500 megawatt of solar energy into the grid. In addition to that, of course, there are individual projects, but these tend to be between the supplier and the consumer directly. We don't count them in our system, but they do exist. A few projects that are happening, about 20-25 megawatt, 3 or 4 of them that at least I can recall. So these are the projects that are happening. In addition to that, of course, the regulator is currently looking into expanding the cost-reflective tariff implementation by, number one, lowering the threshold. So currently we're applying that on all the consumers, industry consumers, at 150 megawatt and above. We're lowering that to probably 100 megawatt, which means more will be covered. And we're also expanding that to include not only the industries, but also the commercials, the tourism, and definitely the government sector. So all government buildings will be. Now, the other thing that is happening is of course, with solar energy, you need some sort of a source of storage. So one thing we're testing is molten salt energy storage. So that is also undergoing a pilot project, and we think that if that one is successful, we can probably expand it. It will help us to expand our solar energy a little bit more, because then we can store it and we can move away from this intermittent nature of the wind and solar into a little bit more reliable, because now we don't consider it as part of our base case. Going forward, we have few projects already in the making. On the wind, we have a project in 2 places, 2 separate projects, adding up to about 300 megawatt of electricity from wind. That is undergoing the request for information as we speak. Probably by end of the year, early next year, we will have the project sanctioned. Hopefully the execution will start. We're estimating that in 2022, late 22, we'll have an additional 300 megawatt of wind energy added. On the solar side, we have two projects undergoing RFQ as we speak for 1,000 megawatt, 500 each. And the target date for that one is probably around 2023. So we'll have another 1,000 megawatt in terms of solar energy added to the system. Our country target is that we will be about 30% of our total energy generation will need to come from renewable energy by 2030. I think we're going to be ahead of that target in no time from the project that I've seen. The other project that we also just launching the RFQ for it is to convert the waste into energy. That we estimate that will probably give us about 50 megawatt of energy from the waste that we currently incinerating or burning. And that will reduce the carbon footprint hopefully by quite a bit. I haven't seen the latest numbers. So these are the sort of projects that are currently on the making. At least the RFQs are in place. The projects that are planned, but we haven't really started working out the details, is what we're doing now is we're studying all the wind and solar potential in Oman, particularly in the south. All the indication shows that we have an extremely favorable position, global position, in terms of the sun radiation, southern part of Oman, and also the wind speed. We think that will be a huge potential for us to start implementing some of the major projects, much more than what we need as a country, but that will also help us then to interconnect with our neighboring countries. We have, of course, the GCC on one side, and we have the Indian continent, and of course the African continent through Yemen, which means that we can actually become an exporter of energy as opposed to just using, because the total potential of the wind and solar energy, if what we currently know is true, and I think it will probably surprise us in a positive way, we should be in a position to start generating more electricity than what we need, and hence expanding that. That study is currently being commissioned. It will take us at least 2 years to gather all the data that we need to be able to put a commercial project for the wind as well as the solar, and probably another 2 to 3 years to be able to commission. The towers for reading the wind energy are currently being erected as we speak. We have about 9 of them or so. So that's in terms of major projects. Of course, the regulator is also working toward removing a lot of the subsidies that we currently have, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't affect the quality of life that everybody is enjoying, particularly those that are in need for additional support, and that is also happening regularly. The other thing they've introduced, and they will be expanding, is what we call Sahim 2. Sahim is basically contribute. That is allowing domestic users to put solar panels on their houses. The first version of that program did not go very well because we expected them to put it out of their own pocket. Not many people actually took that program because you have electricity subsidized and you want me to go and put solar panels on my house. They just don't go together. So what we did is we removed the funding out of it, and we basically passed it on to a third-party investor who will ultimately get compensated using a different formula, which means all you need to do now is just offer your roof to a third-party investor to come and put the solar panels on the roof. You get the benefit of using that electricity, lower your electricity bill, but at the same time, after 4 or 5 years, that becomes totally yours because the investor would have recovered their cost using the formula that I've just mentioned. The current plan is to introduce that to about 3,000 houses in Oman. Long term, we think that will be available to all the houses in Oman. And of course, that is changing the way people are now building their houses, because now you start to care about what you have on the roof, where before you didn't really care much. You can put anything on the roof, the AC, compressors, the water tank, what have you. Now everybody's pushing all of these things aside, creating more space for solar panels to be erected on the roof. So that's really in terms of what we're doing. The biggest thing that we're currently contemplating and we're talking about is there a way of actually converting the additional electricity, particularly from the renewable, into something that can be exported. And the one item that is currently bubbling, and we've seen some news coming from Japan and Australia, is the hydrogen energy. And I personally think that there is a huge place for hydrogen energy in the world. Now, Japan and Australia, they've just announced that they will be the first shipment of hydrogen, even though it's not green, but it will be ultimately by middle of next year. So next year, there will be a shipment of hydrogen leaving Australia all the way to Japan, because Japan is so energy hungry that, and of course with the climate change issues and commitments, they will need to go to a much cleaner source of energy. Nuclear is probably not going to be the source for them. Gas is at the moment, but the future one probably for Japan is going to be hydrogen. Germany is moving in the same direction. In many other countries, I was in the UK a few months back, and one thing they're talking about is spiking hydrogen into the natural gas stream that goes into electricity generation. They're talking about 5% is the safest option today, but it can go up to 30%, and that will just make hydrogen energy generation expand pretty quickly. And I think we have a role to play in that area in Oman. As we generate more and more electricity, we can convert it into hydrogen, and that can go straight into industries and power and also export. So this whole space is changing, and what it's doing is actually trying to generate more energy to meet our energy demand. And of course, many projects that we're executing, and I'm sure there are many other projects around the world, is also trying to lower the carbon footprint. This morning, in the presentation that was given to us by Oxy, there are projects that are actually trying to go carbon negative, which means we start to take the carbon away from the air that I've just mentioned earlier, lowering hopefully the content of carbon from the air from the 450 level to something much lower than that. And these are all projects that are adding up to our energy challenge, and hopefully meeting the dilemma of I need more energy, but I need to lower the carbon footprint and the other gases that are doing more harm than good to the environment. And we're contributing, at least in a smaller scale in Oman, but I think globally we can all collaborate and make this transition as fast as possible, and of course for the betterment of this planet which we all live in. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope I at least explain a little bit what we're doing back home and the challenge that we're facing globally. Thank you for your time.